Welcome to the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, preparing for 2020 Seeding a New Earth Summit. I'm Cayelin Castell, and I'm here with Erik Roth, the managing director of our school. And he is going to be sharing with us some pretty amazing things. But first, we just want to remind everyone that this summit is about exploring, creating greater awareness around the remarkable planetary alignment happening in the year 2020, a year that implies 2020 vision based in the understanding we inform the mysteries as much as they inform us. And I'm so happy that we have Erik Roth here with us today, who is, as I mentioned, the managing director of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. And the school could not do this summit or anything else without him. We so depend on his wizardry to make things happen. And I think I met Erik like 12 years ago, something like that. And he's just been an amazing friend and an amazing, doing his personal work, showing up to further this shamanic astrology work in his own way, as well as for the school. So it is my great pleasure to have Erik begin his presentation. Thank you, Erik.
You're welcome, and thank you for that glowing introduction. That was fabulous. Yeah, we did meet 12 years ago in 2005. It was shortly after I started taking courses from the Shamanic Astrology School. And I have my own practice, and I've had my own astrology practice since 2010. And I do, readings, I do talks along the West Coast, and attend and participate in fairs, holistic fairs, in order for people to come and sample and get a taste of shamanic astrology. So there's a lot of I try to get as much visibility as I can out there, and also promoting what the school's mission is all about. And I'm just really grateful to be part of this online summit and to be able to share what I've learned about the coming alignments in a few years, in 2020 especially, the Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto. So it's wonderful, and I'll have a special offering at the end of this video, which I hope to a limited number. I hope folks will take advantage of that. And I'm grateful that I'm going to be one of 15 other presentations and interviews that have been already either recorded or about to be recorded. Yes. And so we're excited, and I want to wish everyone a happy December solstice. I don't know exactly what day you're going to be watching this video, but it'll be celebrated throughout the month of December.
Indeed.
So,
yes.
very special time from the cosmic sphere and on Earth. Okay, so I can go in and share.
Yes. Yes, we want to see what you have created for us.
Absolutely. Okay. So let's go to a bigger
screen. Yeah,
bigger screen. There we go.
Beautiful.
How's that look?
Looks awesome.
Okay, so I titled this "No Easy Way Through Our Accelerating Times," and as we've been talking about the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, as Daniel Giamario, who created Shamanic Astrology Paradigm, has been talking about, is we are in an accelerated time. And others have echoed this particular statement or have come up with it on their own throughout the last couple of decades especially, and where events just keep piling on one after another, and there's this progress of humanity in a very sometimes bizarre way that it just shows through, not just with technology, but in progress in our social structure, our economic structure, and who we are as individuals, our soul's growth. All of this is accelerating rapidly, and we experience really more events in a year's time for most of us than most of the population of Earth did in, say, the 1800s or the 1700s. So we're really, like, a lot is coming at us, and this time period in which we live is a octave the next octave of the time period from the mid to late 1960s and kind of bleeding a little bit into the early 70s. Of the revolutions, the powerful expressions of people and their changes of the upcoming generation, the political breakdown of the structure, but also a counter resistance to that as well, and where forces collided and created enormous change. And we're now in a period where that change is entering the next stage. And it's yet to be completely manifested. We're still moving in that direction. I know there's a lot of people in my circle of friends and colleagues and peers that are, wanting this to finish.
Let's be done already.
Quickly, let's be done. And we're really just getting warmed up. And that's part of the reason why the summit has been created, is so that we can talk about that. We can prepare for it. We can see, we can get a glimpse and get some clues as to what may possibly happen. Now, I'm going to be giving some information here, but this is not like something that is about predictive astrology, or that, oh, this is going to happen and that you have nothing, you don't have any control over your life. It's not necessarily so. Although there are some forces which we have to surrender to, there are others we can make powerful choices in our lives and have free will to choose our path. And I'm going to be towards the end of the presentation, I have some slides in there and some information about how to prepare, because I'm going to be digging into a lot of the history. And here's I'll show you what will be covered here. Be digging into a little bit of the history of Saturn, and to some degree Pluto and Jupiter. But there's a great focus here on Saturn, because this is something that has been dear to me, in a sense that it's a planet in astrology. For those of you that are new to astrology, in traditional Western astrology, they have planets that are negative or bad, and planets that are good or positive. And in Shamanic Astrology, we don't make those judgments. And so Mars, I did a presentation on Mars, and I've been doing an ongoing webinar series on Mars with Daniel Giamario, where we're inquiry into what Mars really is. And it's not a bad planet. And if you're in a particular cycle, or Mars is in a particular house or sign, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's a matter of interpretation, what people are expressing themselves. But in Shamanic Astrology, we're looking at the essence of these things, the archetypes, the planets, the signs, the essence, and what does it mean for us as human beings, and what does it mean going forward. There will be some things in the presentation which might be considered a lot more than basic, and so I'm forewarning you when you're looking at this to soak it in. I don't expect you to understand 100% of all of this, but I'm going to try to share it in the most basic terms possible, interpret it in the most basic terms possible, with some additional focus on Saturn, and then just looking at preparing yourself for the grand alignment that's taking place in 2020. I've got some information about dates and what happened during previous times when this took place, what happened during previous times when Saturn and Pluto were in conjunction or in alignment in previous times. So, here I'll take a look at Saturn in traditional Western astrology and in Shamanic astrology. Saturn moves into Capricorn next month. It's right now in the sign of Sagittarius. It moves very slowly. It takes about 2.5 to 3 years, depending on its retrograde loop, to move from one sign to another.
And just so people know, next month means December of 2017.
Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you. We're recording this in November, so in December, right about a day or two before the actual solstice, December solstice, Saturn moves into the sign of Capricorn. And the solstice point meaning that's the time of, depending on the hemisphere you're in, either maximum light or minimum light. And up here where I am in Portland, Oregon, it would be minimum light, and for you in Tucson there, Arizona, Cayelin.
Yes.
So that's just something, and I'm going to have some star maps to facilitate where these are in the sky, so you can look for them on your own time as well. And then lastly, not lastly, but upcoming Saturn in Capricorn, a look at Saturn transits, and including the upcoming conjunctions, which of course I think I just mentioned, but also at the end, and not least, but last but not least, of course, how these alignments can be utilized in your life. So what you can do in a real world sense. Even if you don't necessarily understand the astrology, to just be aware that it's going to be a powerful time, an intense time. And it's not meant to end the world. It's not meant to be, this is, that we need to, right all our wrongs and then prepare to go to our heavenly whatever. And when whatever your beliefs are, to go into the afterlife. That's not, I don't think that that's the case. And I think that this is just another stage to help prepare humanity for what's coming after, and to help it prepare for its next stage in evolution. Especially our consciousness and our connection to great mystery, and to Mother Earth, and of course the cosmos itself. All right, so Saturn, I've got it circled right here, the sixth planet from the Sun. On average, it takes about 29.5 years to complete one orbit. This is a really magical. Most planets have numbers that, where we get some of these numbers like 7, and where we get 12, and where we get, like with Venus, we have also the numbers 5 and 8. Some of these numbers are tossed around because they have everything to do with the planet's orbit and how we view the planets from Earth. And the ancients knew this, and so we've known these numbers have been around for many thousands of years. And for Saturn, 29.5, where we tend to round up to 30, and the closest whole number for, say, 1/4 turn around the Sun is about 7 and some change. And so these are really powerful numbers, and Saturn symbolizes maturation at each stage of its orbit there. And we have everyone has Saturn in our life in some form or another, some more than others. And I'm going to share more about what Saturn is. And Saturn, one of the most ancient energies that we know of from a mythological standpoint, and it's borne many names. And I would say next to after Mother Earth, and maybe tied with the planet Venus, it's probably the the one with the greatest amount of stories around it. And if doing the research, looking at various sources, you can see that it goes deep all over the world. No matter what culture, nearly what culture you encounter, Saturn is part of that in some way, under a wide variety of names. So here's the origination of the deity. Over the millennia, the nature and myths of Saturn have shifted and transformed into something malevolent. So it used to be the essence of Saturn was something that represented the golden age of humanity. One is the quote God, or the deity that walked the earth in the golden age, and it was usurped essentially by the patriarchy, or the patrilineal peoples. And over time, that took hold, and then Saturn was eventually exiled and taken over by, from a Roman Greco mythology, from Zeus and Jupiter.
And if we go back far enough, Saturn was feminine, not masculine.
Yeah, it's interesting. There is some evidence to support that it had a feminine nature. I like to also think, this has been growing in my mind, to think of Saturn as something that's could even be neither masculine or feminine, that it could be either, depending on what our connection is with it. And so because it kind of embodies the almost like from a mundane and practical and form standpoint, actual form, actual physical third dimensional form, gravity, that it embodies, sort of its essence, the best of humanity's qualities in the third dimension.
Matter is mother.
There you
Those two
go.
names go together. So Saturn representing matter is mother
Absolutely. And
or
there's a,
grandmother.
right, there's allusions to allusion, Allusion, not illusion, to Saturn being connected to the cosmos in a way where to look at Saturn was to look at the stars, to look at the fabric of space, and that fabric that was woven by the cosmic goddess herself, who in ancient Greece and Rome was either Ananke, 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 or the goddess of necessity, and she was the one who weaved the fabric of space and time itself, alongside with the Saturn entity or representative imagery. So this is it. There's a lot of. Thank you, Cayelin, for sharing about matter and mother, because it's vitally important, and the biggest, the oldest connection that we've found underneath the earth is these the mother symbols, the what do they call it, these small statues that are found all over Europe and Asia. Some of them are tens of thousands of years old, and it shows that we've had this great connection with Mother Earth, and really, really powerful, and we've always respected it. And only in the last really 2,000 to 3,000 years that it's been disrespected and dishonored, and we've forgotten a lot of our connection to that. It's like a missing part of us. So here's the ancient names of Saturn. Some of them you may or may not recognize, but as you can see, it was all over the world, in the Americas, in Asia Minor, and of course in Europe and Africa as well. So I also encourage and invite you to, because this is an area where if you're looking at a planet, I always encourage a person to look at the essence of where that came from, not just the Roman or Greco belief, but going well beyond where that name actually came from and why a particular planet was named that. There's a lot of mythology that points to actual stories and that have a relationship with the cosmos, and we're part of that fabric. Humanity is the mythology. Humanity is Mother Earth, and Mother Earth is humanity and the cosmos itself. We're tied into it no matter what we do. We can never necessarily separate. We can pretend that it doesn't exist, but it's there.
We're
It's
really
part
good
of
at that
us.
too.
We can be, yeah. So I'm not going to read this whole, this is just a slide for you to take in. If you want to certainly pause this, you can read a lot about this. But a lot of this information comes from the book Hamlet's Mill, and I've written a little bit here, Hamlet's Mill, and it goes into how the transmissions of mythology throughout time have informed humanity. A lot of those transmissions come from a lot of stories around the changes of world ages, the mythology around Saturn, and the Saturn that was named prior to that, Enki and Ea, from ancient Mesopotamia, but also from other names or in other cultures, like I mentioned in the previous slide. There's also some stuff about some speculation and also some theories around cosmically where Saturn was really exiled to. And one of the ones that really makes sense to me based on the research is the star Canopus, and it's a first magnitude star that we can't see up here in some of the northern hemisphere. I think you can see it part of the time where you are in 31 degrees north latitude in Arizona. But here in the Oregon area, it can't be seen. However, 13,000 years ago, this is why Saturn has a great connection with world ages. Canopus was the brightest star the brightest closest star that marked the South Pole. And around the same time that Vega loosely marked the north celestial pole. So we can, that's something to, a lot of us have forgotten, and as far as humanity and it's something worthwhile to explore on your own. Just to give you some information about Saturn and what it was called: the Lord of Time, the Lord of Measures, the Lord of the Mill, and the Lord of the World Order. And those names carried for many thousands of years, depending on the culture that you read about.
The Lord of Time. So Chronos actually, it's like it has to do with time, chronological.
Yes.
It's connected to, so that's why Chronos is connected to time, and Saturn, of course, being
Yeah, absolutely.
to
That's where we get our word. I mean, chronology, absolutely.
Right.
And I encourage you to look up the word Eridu and Eridanus, and certainly through the book Hamlet's Mill. But I know that there are other books out there that have been inspired by that particular book. And I think even Daniel Giamario talks about the golden age, a little bit of humanity, and from an Eastern perspective, he writes about the particular yugas. As he presented that, right?
Yes, he did.
And the golden age was known as Krita Yuga, and so that ended. Well, depending on one's measurement, here's where it's speculated around 4,500 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. But going back to Canopus, it was actually visible in it first became visible in southern Mesopotamia around 4,500 years ago, and before that. So it's interesting that when the star became visible is around the time that Saturn began to be exiled. So it was a star that started up, and then some of the mythology around that began to be born. So it's worth researching. It's worth looking into. I know that I'm going to be doing greater work in this area. So this is just something, some good information for you to take in about the essence of what Saturn is.
I love this, Erik, and the thing about becoming visible, because Canopus is always visible somewhere on the planet, but you're talking about in the latitudes of where in Rome, in Greece, in the places where they were creating these stories.
Yes.
When it became visible. And that's
Absolutely.
why they started using it. Yeah, because, it's still visible.
It will. Yeah.
And in certain latitudes.
And in many thousands of years from now, it'll be visible actually all the way up here at 45 degrees latitude for a short period of time. It's interesting how, because of this goes into cosmology and goes into the wobble of the Earth and its orbit, and so I'm not going to get into a lot of that because the presentation might last 3 or 4 hours. So
we don't want that.
Right. So turning back to Saturn and looking at what the essence of Saturn brought to humanity: agriculture, astronomy, astrology, mathematics, architecture, laws, rules, and boundaries. The first human laws essentially were given to that. Measurements, writing, although there is some, depending on what you read, obviously the Mercury figure or the Hermes figure is credited with that. And I think that the Mercury Hermes figure had some, and this is again for further study, had some major connection to the Saturn figure in this sense. And I don't know necessarily how that really worked out because I haven't studied it, but it's worth checking out. The figure that Daniel likes to talk about, Hermes Trismegistus, that's a Mercury-like figure. So this is a new perspective on Saturn. The Western perspective really focused on the bad and shadowed aspects of what Saturn brings into our lives. And in Shamanic Astrology, we look at, again, going back to the essence of that. And a lot of those negative aspects came about really just before the Christian church came into power, and its origins go back even a little bit farther to Judaism and the sacrificial goat. And there's some great stories around that, but Saturn was essentially taken and brought down, and it was like a fallen deity ruler of sorts, and made out to be evil and sometimes the devil itself. But this is really far from the truth. Saturn wants to work with humanity, wants to see us shine in our own way. But, part of how we do that is having to follow the rules and work with them in the most productive way, a way that is in harmony with our soul's path, and to also shed rules and laws and structures that no longer serve us anymore. And this is what Saturn really brings to us and can help us build a future that we really want. And shamanic astrology honors that process. And in regular Western astrology, they tend to skate around that by just playing Saturn in a particular limited role, along with the other planets. I'm not saying all astrologers do that. There's a lot of astrologers now that are opening up to the more flexible definitions and more fluid definitions of the essence of these planets. And I continue to encourage other astrologers and other people that are into this to look at Saturn to open up to Saturn possibly in a new way. Again, this is just more on this Saturn and what shamanic astrology looks at. Whether it's in a Saturn in a transit. I'm going to actually be providing these slides at some point to the paid participants here, so that you can see that information and hold on to it, because I'm not going to read every single line here. This is just basically for your information. But some of I'll do some of the highlights. Obviously, the biggest one, Saturn represents growth through limits and boundaries. And that, for some people, can be really hard, and actually many of us can be really hard to get to, because there can be an intense pressure, a heavy gravity alongside that pushes us in a certain direction and pushes us at least to make a decision, to take an action toward that decision. And we resist that. And when we do resist that, that's when some of the more negative or shadowed effects can happen, when we end up fighting against ourselves. Saturn also represents, especially when we get into a transit, represents a checkpoint in our life, a maturation point, a time to get real, a time to sit down and look at the facts and go, okay, what do I need to do? What decision do I need to make regarding many parts of our lives, whether it's our work life, our social life, our relationships. All of those are real world things. Money, economics especially. What results can we create for ourselves that are more in harmony with who we are?
Can I just say quickly,
Yeah.
Erik, that for people who maybe have an astrological background, one of the things we did in shamanic astrology was rename what's called hard aspects to dynamic aspects. So that's one of the things that Erik is indicating here.
Yeah. So yeah,
squares, conjunctions,
right,
and oppositions.
Squares, which are essentially an L shape on a natal chart. An opposition means that one planet is on the other side of the sky from the other, or one stellar body from the other stellar body. That's opposition. And a conjunction means that they're close together within what we call a shamanic conjunction, within 10 degrees, which is if you extend your arm out with a closed fist and to the sky, that's about roughly 10 degrees. A finger is roughly about 1 degree, extended all the way out. And so that's something that you can test on your own, and when these planets come together, it's a great exercise to do. One of the things about about Saturn is being able to own up to your own responsibilities and being accountable to your own actions and your own words. And that's something that, especially when you're in a Saturn cycle, is something you want to be completely honest with yourself and not to avoid it. And you know, in the current times in which we live with fake news and all the lies that are being shared, especially in politics, you can see what happens when people aren't accountable, and that there is, like, when there is little accountability, what takes place. But when we're accountable to ourselves, when we're accountable to the people that we love and that we work with, things can, it doesn't always work out for the best, but things can, you know, you can live with yourself. It's you can live with your conscience, and you're honest, and it makes for generally a better flow for your soul's growth. At least in my experience, and also in working with many clients, that's been the experience as well. One of the things about working with Saturn, and which I'll get into more, is actually going and being under the stars, being with Saturn in the night sky. And even if it's daytime, just connecting with it, connecting with that energy, and just being open to the transmissions, meditate on it. You know, for some that are more into magic and ceremony and ritual, then there's sometimes a certain calendric days and moments when you can really connect with Saturn in a big way, especially if you were in a personal transit with Saturn. Here we are, December 19th of 2017. So, you know, at the time that you watch this video is going to be available, it's only be about maybe 2 weeks at most, maybe 10 days when this happens. So here in the night sky, this is where Saturn is. The sun will be at 28 degrees Sagittarius. So Saturn will be very close at that point to at the winter solstice. So it's 0 degrees. That's what marks the winter solstice point, or what we call the December solstice point, because it's summer solstice in the southern hemisphere of Earth. And it's pretty, you can see the run up here. Now, while Pluto is not visible to the naked eye, you can see on this particular day, you've got a Moon-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn. Saturn is not far away. Of course, Saturn won't be visible because it'll be behind the sun. Venus will also be invisible, but you can see Mercury may be visible, only 15 degrees away from the sun, so we'll see. But this is the lineup here that starts sort of kicks off the process, you know, with this Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto alignment. You can see Jupiter is not anywhere near here, not yet anyway, but it's following close behind. You can bet on that. And Pluto. So the stars of the Archer, this is the Archer constellation, what astronomers call Sagittarius, but don't be confused that it's not the same as the sign Sagittarius. You can see the border where Capricorn is, where Saturn is, then you see Sagittarius over here. And then all this is Capricorn here.
And that's because it's seasons, not constellations or stars. So the signs are seasonal and have to do with the you know, solstices and equinoxes and the seasons of we experience here on Earth. And the constellations are the backdrop that these seasons move through. That's the short description.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, the signs are seasonal. The constellations play an important role in informing the signs, but they are different. So it's something that I encourage everybody out there that is watching this to look at yourself, you know, with research, to open up the books and information on the net about what the differences are. And Cayelin did an enormously amazing video about that on YouTube, on her YouTube channel. So feel free to dive into that when you get a chance.
It's 15-minute YouTube, yeah.
Yeah, but it's well worth it. So Saturn travels through Capricorn. Oops. Okay. Had a slide malfunction there. All right. Saturn travels through Capricorn between December 19, 2017 and December 16, 2020. Now that looks like that's a 3-year period, but there's a 3.5 month period of time when Saturn is in Aquarius. So it's closer to 2.5, but because it retrogrades back into that sign for a little while longer, Saturn is, it looks like it's in the sign for 3 solid years. But that's why I've got that, this whole Capricorn Aquarius thing, because there's a piece of this that I want to talk about that's Aquarius with Saturn and Jupiter. So the last time Saturn was in Capricorn was between 1988 to 1991. When Saturn enters the sign, it can act in 2 ways. One is a stabilizer, and 2 is a pressure, a stress point for our own reality. So it's us to be aware of the reality of where we are, what we're doing, and who we are, and if we're in harmony with our path. A stabilizer in an essential way when, say, it's in relationship to another planet, say Uranus or Pluto or Neptune. Although those planets still have an expression, so but it still provides an earthy, earth element to the relationship to, say, an underworld or a celestial world planet. Saturn in Capricorn takes us to the original evolving seed point of what transpired the last time Saturn was in Capricorn. So it's now, depending on how one measures this, one can go back to, I'll say, 1988 to 1991 and find some facts there, but then they can go back another close to 30 years and find more information and beyond and beyond and beyond. So you could keep going, but there are certain things that can start during these particular processes. And Saturn in Capricorn, if this hasn't been shared before, Saturn and Capricorn are very similar to each other. They resonate with each other in a big way. In traditional astrology, they would say Saturn rules Capricorn, but we don't look at rulerships here. We don't look at something's better, one is ruling over another. It's that these participate in with each other, and it just so happens that Saturn and Capricorn have a lot of similar, a very similar essence with each other. Capricorn is something that is associated with the circle of grandmothers, the planting of seeds for the next 7 generations, especially when it comes to knowledge and things that are in harmony with humanity. And that's why when I mentioned the gifts that Saturn brought, the things that they have in common, like agriculture, astronomy, architecture, and laws, these are things that was part of the golden age that brought humanity, essentially civilization, according to a lot of the stories and the mythology that we read about. So looking back to 1988, 1991, some of what I find interesting about this is there's a lot of scandal, controversy, and things, major transformations happening. Now, Saturn wasn't the only thing that created the opportunities for this. There were other planets involved. I don't want to put Saturn here in a vacuum, but these are some major events that you can look at and that look like, okay, this is like, there's some things like the Soviet Union begins to collapse. There's the democratic revolution, so we say, in the Soviet Union. Oliver North and John Poindexter, the Iran-Contra affair, a huge scandal in the 1980s. So if you can actually see, when you're looking at this, you can see some echoes of what's transpiring now. There was a more democratic, so there was certain seeds that were planted, like the first Persian Gulf War. That was like, we were really, and the United States was in a major way, in a more mainstream, visible way, getting involved in the Middle East more than at any other time. And we've been heavily involved in it since then, and I think we're going into another stage of that. You can see some other facts there, and I've got when Saturn was in the sign of Capricorn down here on the bottom of what months it was in. Over the 20th century, 1900 to 1903 includes months retrograding back into Sagittarius. 1929 to 1932, going retrograding into Sagittarius and ingress into Aquarius. And then before the 88 to 91 period, it was in there between January 5th, 1959 and January 3rd, 1962. I think there was some retrograde in there. Maybe I just forgot to put it in there, that it ingressed into another sign. But you can see some notable events, and that have to do with planting the seeds. Like, for example, in 1900, the U.S. went on a gold standard. There were there was an assassination. There were, Cuba becomes independent from the U.S. There's some interesting things that I'm going to share with you later that have to do with following these cycles of patterns, not just in the United States, but in the world, that have to do with Saturn and Pluto. And to some degree, also Jupiter. I'm going to be including that towards the end. But these are some of the things that happen with Saturn and Capricorn. They're planting the seeds. It doesn't matter whether it's these can be seeds that can benefit humanity, or like the rise of Nazism and and communism, the way it was expressed, may not be of great benefit to humanity, except in a way of what not to do later. what is
learn from those mistakes, right?
Yes, exactly. And even the Wall Street crash, I found that really intriguing, that it happened at the beginning stages of Saturn moving into Capricorn, although the actual crash took place when Saturn had retrograded back a little bit into Sagittarius. And I find it interesting because that it's kind of beyond the scope of this presentation, but there's some interesting facts about the connection of Saturn and Sagittarius and what takes place in that retrograde loop. So the planet isn't actually moving backwards in the sky. It's just a perspective of Earth's perspective. It looks like it's moving backwards because the Earth is catching up with a planet in orbit. From our perspective. And so what I mean by retrograde, it looks like it's moving backwards in the sky, but it really isn't. So I encourage you to obviously look up the definition yourself, but that's essentially what that means. And it could be also paints a picture of retrograde, means it's in a place for a certain part of the sky for several months. And it's kind of like beaming into that particular portion of the night sky. And as I'm sure Cayelin has shared on many occasions on membership calls and other classes about what that really entails. And you can also see the seeds of the Vietnam War or during this period time as well. So Saturn in Capricorn is played an important role. I didn't look at where the other planets were at that time, but there were other alignments. And I want to stress that Saturn doesn't operate in a void, that other planets were contributing to various expressions of how Saturn and Capricorn operated. Okay, so Saturn and Pluto. So now we're moving into Saturn and Pluto. So we talked about Saturn, now Saturn and Pluto. Now they've had a specific alliance, and I want to credit Richard Tarnas for his work in his book Cosmos and Psyche, and where I was able to find some information fairly quickly, but other information that wasn't present that I looked elsewhere for in other research. But it's for those of you who want to look at especially mundane astrology and the effects of cycles on a global level, but also give some examples on a personal level. It's a wonderful book to read, but take your time with it because it's really thick.
Yes, it is.
So as you can see, December 2018 to 2021, this is really when Saturn and Pluto are within a shouting distance, spitting distance of each other. And I've got question marks there because we don't know, exactly what's going to take place. The last time there was a relationship between Saturn and Pluto, what we call, as Cayelin and I talked about, dynamic or hard aspects, squares, conjunctions, or oppositions. In 2008 to 2011, There was the big, the housing market crash and economic crisis, and also the very beginnings of the Arab Spring revolutions. So you can see that there is another point to that that's going to come up during the next Saturn-Pluto relationship in the end of 2018 and especially 2019 and 2020. Saturn-Pluto opposition in 2001 took place during the 9/11 event here in the U.S. 1993, Saturn-Pluto square, World Trade Center bombing. So both events took place, both World Trade Center bombings or attacks took place with Saturn-Pluto relationship. So that's something that, it's not a coincidence kind of a thing. I also found it interesting that that in 1993 there was the North Korea left the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And there obviously is some great drama happening with North Korea and the current government that we have here in place in Washington, D.C., somebody by the name of the Donald. I think that it's going to enter the next stage with North Korea in that. I'm not saying there's going to be a nuclear war. I just think that there's going to be something that transpires that will evolve it to the next stage.
We hope it will evolve
yes.
it, not
and
just
right.
crash and burn it.
Exactly. And 2020 is an election year, and here in the U.S. and so we've got some major decisions to make as a country at that time. Here's more, kind of going a little bit farther back in time, 73 to 74, Saturn-Pluto square, a Watergate scandal ending with Nixon resignation. So another thing to look at, because we're certainly having a scandal that's happening with the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And
probably more than one.
Yes, more than one, for sure. But if we go back to 46 and 49, this is really the beginning of the Cold War between the U.S. and Russia, or the USSR. McCarthyism starts. The seeds of the current North Korean government. And what's interesting is the North Korean government really was mostly founded by the Russians. Chinese had some input there, but the Russians really the first leader that was there was supported by Russia. And so I find this really intriguing about what the relationship is happening now and how Russia is sort of like in that space as well, along with China in this whole North Korea drama. So it's just something that bears watching. As you can see, Saturn and Pluto, for whatever reason, they have North Korea is part of this. They were born essentially during a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So we're now approaching that again. 1939, 1940, World War II, very powerful time in world history there. 1931, 32, again, rise of Nazism and Japanese expansion. So there's a lot of serious things that took place. Now, what I'm showing is the more dramatic things. Now, there were other things that happened during these years that maybe have been contributed to by, say, Uranus or other planetary alignments that weren't just about war and strife and oppression or totalitarianism. There were other things that were going on. And this is where, as humanity, why I'm sharing these examples, because we can choose a better path for ourselves. We can choose something different. We don't have to choose this. We chose that during that time for whatever reason as a collective. And we also saw whenever there's something powerful that happens in humanity that is tragic through war or through a natural disaster, there's this counter reaction of love and compassion and help and hope that can swarm the globe. And initially during 9/11, I want to point out that after 9/11, the world actually got together for a little while before the U.S. started getting warmongering. The world came together and in sympathy and compassion and love, and it was beautiful to behold. And so that's an example of what we can do for ourselves. We don't necessarily usually means that there's a catalyst that brings us together, but we don't necessarily have to have a catalyst. But perhaps Trump is a catalyst in this sense for ourselves. Maybe that's where we can really get together and find connection, find common ground and peace with ourselves, instead of choosing, ego and narcissism and immediate satisfaction, gratification. That's what I meant. So I got this. This is the background here is a photograph I took at the beach. There's a crow sitting on a warning sign there. Do not go, high danger, large rocks, do not cross this line. That's kind of a very Saturn-like a sign there. So I thought it was appropriate for this. So here's we're not going to go into, we don't have time to go into these charts, but I grabbed some people here. And again, these slides are going to be, I think, Cayelin, you convinced me to make these available for people who paid for this. And I may give another offering also for free. But these people were born during Saturn-Pluto dynamic or hard aspects. And they were all very powerful. They made powerful impacts in society in different ways, like Steven Spielberg, Oliver Stone in entertainment, changing the way we see movies, and really influencing culture in enormous ways. We see people who were cult leaders like Jim Jones and Marshall Applewhite that basically had a cult that where they had group suicides that took place. The Jonestown cult was the one that was mostly known about in history, that where hundreds of people died in South America, where the whole drinking your Kool-Aid joke comes into play. That's where that comes from. Right. And you can see some assassins in there, the presidents. You can see some amazing people like Carrie Fisher, who was outspoken, and she really just bared her all after the sort of the early abuse that she suffered in her early acting career. People in long-term history, St. Augustine, who wrote The City of God, that, where, bless you.
Thank you.
Where it was like founding like the expression of that influenced a lot of Christian leaders about what is God like, what should we do, what is Christian like, what should we be in this life, and kind of separating Christian from everybody else, even from nature itself.
I just want to mention Oliver Stone did a documentary series on the true history of the United States that is really amazing. It goes into some of the things that you've been talking about here, and really looks deeply at all of this, the whole Calvinism thing, the world wars, all that. So he did some really brilliant work with that. And I think it's like 6 episodes or something on Netflix.
I may have heard of that. Is it on? I'll have to catch it in. Thank you for that. For folks out there, definitely tune into that. It seems like right up the alley of what I'm sharing here.
It is. Perfect. Absolutely.
That's perfect. There is, this was, I learned about some other people. Some of these were mentioned in Richard Tarnas's book, Cosmos and Psyche. But others I looked up on my own by doing research on solar fire, which is a great tool to look up people with certain aspects. Anise Parker, she was the one, she was gay, and she was the one that authored an Equal Rights Act for in a place that was mostly, one could say, conservative. And there was a lot of controversy there, but this only happened a few years ago. And in a way, she became an activist and in that sense. So it was really cool to read up on her and what she tried to accomplish there. It's still controversial. It went in and out, and I'm not sure what the current status of it is because of what I looked at. It kind of left a lot to be open, so I don't really know whether it's still in effect or not. But that, you can see also right around that time when Obama and the not Obama, but the U.S. Supreme Court, passed the case that that gay marriage was legal, that civil unions of this sort, there's nothing. It's a constitutional right. So it's not against the Constitution, and these are some of the things that were coming out from these people, activism, but also the opposite way, where you look at Karl Marx and John Calvin, and they both seeded either through ideas or through actions a lot of violence and revolution. You even have Donald Rumsfeld here, and Joseph McCarthy. I mentioned McCarthyism. But you can see some things here that are worth looking up, and what Saturn-Pluto brings to a personal chart. Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter conjunction. So Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto stay within 15 degrees of each other throughout 2020 and early 2021. The conjunction takes place mainly in Capricorn, but also a little bit in Aquarius. So there's some bleed over into Aquarius, which is why I have the symbol of Aquarius here.
You mean Saturn and Jupiter will be in Aquarius together, because Pluto doesn't go into Aquarius for quite a while. Yeah. Right.
Well, that's what I mean by that it bleeds over into Aquarius, is that part of the conjunction takes place in Aquarius, and that Saturn and Jupiter particularly do move into that briefly, and Saturn especially. And then at the end of 2020, there is a exact and only one Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, and I have a celestial display of that, which I'll talk about shortly. So all three planets are within 4 degrees of each other between November 8th and 21st of 2020. And this is exactly at the right around the stage of the U.S. general election. I think it takes place on November 8th on that year, maybe the 9th, but I think it's the 8th. And so when that election is happening, all three planets, Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter, will be within a 4-degree range. And so there'll be a very tight circle with each other. So the last time this kind of conjunction took place in Capricorn Aquarius was in 1284 and 1286, something that is mentioned in the main page for the online summit, Seeding the New World. And they were, at that time, they were a 6-degree orb between, in November as well, November 1st through 17th in 1285, at their closest, grouping. That's very interesting that took place in that time. So it'll be another 734 years when another conjunction of this kind takes place in Capricorn. Now they do have conjunctions in other signs in other centuries. So it's just in this particular sign, or Capricorn or Aquarius, when it's another 734 years. So it's a very rare, extremely rare situation. This is for your information, and I've got some circling the dates. You can see the blue areas in relation to the signs on the chart of the years that all three planets were within a 15-degree zone of each other, and where we are here, 2021 to 2020, 2021, in this area here, between mostly in Capricorn, but a little bit in Aquarius. And you can see the other zones where there were major conjunctions, but you can see this one is a particularly active one in the last 4,000 years, between 1000 BC to 3000 AD, or what is known more scientifically, Common Era CE. The pattern is roughly 700 to 900 years between conjunctions in the same sign. So it takes that long for all three planets to come back around and together in a conjunction in the same, around the same sign grouping. And what I mean by that, like we have here, like a little bit of Libra and Scorpio. We have bleed over in Pisces, Aries. So that's the kind of thing I'm sharing. So December 21st, Saturn-Jupiter at 0 Aquarius. Now, for those of you that are, when we want to mention, those of you that are new to astrology and don't know much about it, each sign has 30 degrees in it, and it starts from 0 and it goes to 29. There are 12 houses, and each house contains a whole sign with the Shamanic Astrology system. And whenever two planets are together in the same sign like this, it's well, even in different signs, but it means it's vitally important. There's something really there to be expressed. And so even though the most of the year Capricorn is sort of dominant in this way, at the end of the year, Saturn begins to move into Aquarius, and Jupiter is moving into Aquarius as well. And so this brings up some interesting questions about maybe Aquarius represents sort of the aftermath of what took place in Capricorn that seeded whatever needed to be seeded at that time, or carried to another octave. And you can see Pluto is not very far. It's only 6 degrees away. It's still in Capricorn. Pluto doesn't actually move into Aquarius until the year 2024. So we have some years about that. And you can see the constellations. So this takes place in the early evening sky, so you'll be able to, most people will be able to look at this. Now, I live in Portland, so I may not have much of a chance to see this unless I do some traveling, which, because this is a very rare event, I think I'm going to try to be somewhere else at that time. Or roll the dice and I hope I get to see it. Now, again, Pluto is not visible unless you have a really good telescope. But Saturn is going to outshine. I'm sorry, Jupiter will outshine Saturn. So when you see this by a lot. So when you see this, Jupiter will be the bright object there, and then Saturn will be a more dimmer yellowish point of light. But when I look at my night sky program, these are these are sort of artistic examinations of the planets, but they don't actually, you don't see them like that when you're looking at the night sky. It's just I got them there for the video itself. But when I look at the night sky software, Saturn and Pluto are so close together that they're almost indistinguishable. I think that when we actually get to this time in 3 years, you'll be able to tell the difference. You'll be able to see them apart. But I think they could be less than half a degree, maybe a third of a degree apart in the sky. So close to where it's pretty. It will be pretty dramatic. Here is another time during 2020 to look at. We're not too far away from Cayelin. I apologize for going a little bit over here. I was thinking that I had originally. I just remembered. I thought I had up to 90 minutes, but so anyway, I'll try to get through this because we're near the end. March 25th, 2020. This is the second half of March in 2020. There's going to be 4 planets together. And I know there's another time when Venus is nearby too. I didn't look up that, but Mars is a slower moving planet. So and I've been focusing on Mars in my studies. So the second half of March of 2020 is definitely going to be a particularly important time to take in the night sky, but also to be aware of what's going on, and especially after that alignment. Usually the energy is released out there after the alignment takes place. But you can see they're all within 7 degrees of each other. Pluto obviously not visible to the naked eye, but they're all between the Archer and the Goatfish constellation there. So what does it mean to have them together? The priority is to first seeing Saturn and Pluto together, then adding Jupiter. Saturn-Pluto typically brings up elements of contraction, including the separation of different nations and cultures, limiting growth, rigidly polarized conflict, shadows of conservatisms. There's the information I got from Cosmos and Psyche, Richard Tarnas. Policing and nightmare or even apocalyptic scenarios are being seeded or envisioned. A lot of that happens, but there is a counter to this. These are the more dramatic things that make the news waves. But there is also, as I mentioned during the 9/11 thing, I think that there's the counter element of love and compassion and unity and love for one another's brothers and sisters and human souls. I think that is also going to be playing a major role in how we get through these accelerating times, how we get through this alignment. So it's an energy that's been known to bring about collapse of long-standing structures and systems, including governments and movements. So what I'm saying here is that I think that there will, I mean, my feel is that there's something that's already starting to collapse, some structures that are already giving way, some systems are already giving way, and new things are being born.
The old has to die before the new can be born.
Absolutely, and that's just where Saturn and Pluto can really make magic together, and really do some amazing things together. Where we can as Daniel likes to say, compost what no longer serves us into something something that's more in harmony with who we are. You know, maybe new economic systems will be born. Maybe new social systems and structures will be born, and this is that beginning of the gestation period of that.
And if we're visioning it and we're creating the space within ourselves for that to be true in our own lives, then that can be also reflected in our outer reality as well.
Yes.
So that's why we wanted to do this whole summit. You just kind of nailed it right there.
There you go. Perfect. Jupiter's arrival in the mix. When I look at Jupiter, there can be one of two ways, but the more powerful one is to act as an expander, an amplifier to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So whatever energy is going on at the time, Jupiter can trigger an amplification, but also a potential for triggering more enthusiasm for the Saturn-Pluto alignment, which almost doesn't make any sense. Why would you be enthusiastic for that alignment? But
maybe because there's a new vision, because Jupiter also can bring in new visions, and so we get enthusiastic about the new vision that's coming in, and that can be expanded. And
exactly, and as we get towards the end of that alignment, I think with Jupiter and Saturn moving into Aquarius, I think that new vision can really take off in a big way. Mm-hmm. And I think that the aftermath and the things that are seeded, that Aquarius, one of the things it can do, it can see the bigger picture. It can see the wider horizons and be able to look at it, from a more idealistic and universal loving picture. There's a light polarization, but with Saturn that can provide some balance there. So it's definitely a way to see that. But the U.S. is, I'm going to get into a little bit, is in the pre-stages of experiencing what we call Pluto return. That means that at the time that when the U.S. was born in 1776, Pluto has gone, by the year 2021, 2022, Pluto will have gone all the way around the sun, and 248 years later, roughly, it's back to where it was when the U.S. was born. So it really is this Saturn-Jupiter-Pluto lineup is leading into that whole Pluto return. So basic intent to face these limits and boundaries and the fear of powerlessness, losing control, and surrender to our soul. So those are really important factors that, again, this is part of the preparation stage, is how can we face our own limits and boundaries, and for those around us as well, how can we stand up to them and understand what they are, whether it's holding us back from ourselves and our future, or whether it's there to support us in a healthy way. And then the fear of powerlessness. Well, this is where Pluto comes in, and this is where we can surrender to it. and not this doesn't mean that we're going to die from it. I always loved the Life of Pi movie, and I haven't read the book, but the movie was really impactful in the sense where Pi was on the raft in the middle of the ocean, and he tried everything in his power to try to find land, and he's with this strange tiger, and he literally surrenders to it all in the middle of a storm, and he holds his arms up, and he basically gives up, and he just collapses. And then the next day, well, of course, the magic of movies, he finds land. But it's an example of what actually could take place, maybe over a longer period of time. But for individuals like ourselves, we can surrender to ourselves and our path, and not try to fight what we think is best, what we sort of cobbled together, what we thought was best for us, even though we know it's unhealthy. This is a time where we can see our fears, and like they don't have to own us anymore. They can become our allies. So in a way, there is a dark night of the soul imagery there, but it's necessary, and it's ultimately beneficial to us. It's not evil. It's not going to bring hell on earth.
It could feel like that at moments.
It could, at times, it could feel like that.
But ultimately, it's like what needs to go so that something else can come in, and are we willing to surrender and die to that so that we can, basically dying to who we think we are, so we can be born to who we truly are. And that's not always an easy process.
Well said. Well said. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of look at this a little bit. This is the state of affairs, and this talks a little bit about the coming Pluto return, and some of what on the bottom especially, and something what Cayelin and I have just talked about. So we have organic natural laws mix in with human-made laws and expanded by Jupiter. I do feel that it is a critical stage of humanity, the early 2020s especially, but even leading up to that is sort of the precursor to that. There will be seeds to counteract things that are perceived as negative, but again, it's our perception of how we view things. And I think in a follow-up thing, the Pluto return of the United States will be something I'd want to talk more about at a later time. But these are just facts you can see on your slides here. More data on so this is just essentially going through history and looking at what took place. You can see Rome went from a republic to an empire during one of these triple conjunctions. The Visigoths sacked Rome at one time, in the city of God, St. Augustine, which I talked about as one of the people born with the Saturn-Pluto alignment. The first English colonization of North America began, and the Gregorian calendar began to be adopted at that in one of those triple conjunctions. President Garfield is assassinated, and I put in with Chiron and Neptune. And in 81, 82, in Libra, the sign of Libra, President Reagan was shot. A harder line was taken with the Soviet Union, and the first signs of the AIDS epidemic took place. And a lot of those things, we've learned quite a bit and done a lot of amazing beneficial things for humanity, especially when it came to the AIDS epidemic, and how we looked at people, especially the LGBTQ community as well. I think that came out and ultimately helped us to have compassion and love, that they're just as human as anybody else. Because there was a time, in fact, I don't think I have it. No, I don't. There was an alignment, and I can't remember exactly, but it wasn't until like the late 80s when I think it might have been the World Health Organization or the United Nations stopped making gay and lesbian illegal. Like it was something that was beneath human at one time.
Like it was an illness.
Like it was an illness, yeah. Trying to cure people, and it ended when it ended during a Saturn-Pluto conjunction or a alignment. I thought I had included in this
I think
presentation.
you
But
did
that's
an
just
earlier slide that was there. I
okay.
also just want to mention that the Gregorian calendar was a way of fixating consciousness in the material world. And so it's interesting that that happened in a Saturn-Pluto-Jupiter conjunction, and that perhaps we are now coming into a time when we can move beyond that fixation.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Because we live in such a linear place, and everything is so left-brained
Mm-hmm.
that we lose touch with parts of our humanity. And I think the Gregorian calendar limits us in some way. As an example. Now, I personally think we can create a much better calendar as a
Well, it
collective.
is accurate in many ways,
It
and I
is.
guess it does serve a kind of purpose, but how can we have also a more cyclical connection to the earth and the sky and the seasons and the things that are going on? So maybe what we need to do is add that piece in. I don't know that we're going to get rid of the Gregorian calendar necessarily, but
Probably
you
not.
know, just to have the awareness that there was there was something that happened to fixate awareness in a more material sense, and how can we bring in other understanding to expand that awareness at this next, as we're going through a Saturn-Pluto-Jupiter conjunction. Woohoo!
Well said. Thank you.
Yeah.
So what can we do to actually prepare? So I'm closing in here near the end. Everyone will be, in a sense, at the effect of. So it's like we're all in this. This isn't something, and why I say there's no easy way out or no easy way through. I need to correct that slide there. There's no easy way through, is that we're all in it together, and that you cannot stick your head in the sand and pretend that it's not happening.
Well, you can, but it won't be helpful.
Okay. Technically speaking, yes, you can, but it won't help.
It is a choice a person could make, yeah, but it won't
is.
be helpful. Yeah.
So historically, Saturn and Pluto have been seen in a negative light, but as Cayelin mentioned, Saturn does have a bit of a feminine energy, and Pluto, if you go far enough back, especially before the patriarchal societies took hold, it was feminine. It was the underworld goddess, Kali and Ereshkigal, and there were others. Pele, for example.
Hecate.
Yeah, exactly. So this is something, in fact, in a recent movie, there's a portrayal of what they call Hela in a movie Thor, Ragnarok. And she's obviously the portrayer in a very dramatic and a negative light, but she's feminine, and she really is about the underworld, goddess of death. But really, it's death and rebirth in the underworld. And so she's that's another example of looking at Pluto as it was hijacked, just like Saturn was, and many other archetypes were hijacked by the patriarchy in their own way, like stripped of power. So we can honor these transits instead of seeing them in negative light. We can honor them by focusing on what needs to transform, what needs to compost, what needs to be built anew in the future, and meditate and think about and take in the essence of what these represent, not what is popularized in from especially medieval astrology and even in the 18th and 19th centuries and early part of the 20th century, where these planets were seen and with negative and bad stuff. This is in alignment with long-term consequences. So this is not, this is something that's going to seed the future for a long time. And it's going to take a long time to get there. So it isn't like, things may be happening quickly, but it'll need time to settle. And so that's part of what this alignment is to allow ourselves to see it in the longer term.
And what we're seeding will take time to grow. So we need to being aware that we are seeding a new world. We are the seed people for this, and that we may not see all the results of it, but we are the ones that are seeding it. How cool is that?
It is very much, and we have the power to do that. That's something that in our society a lot of us have given away our power, but we as individuals have that power to make those choices, to plant those seeds, and to work with this as co-creators, as the power to as a collective, and that's something that I continue to stress in talks that I do, and even sometimes in personal readings, depending on a person's chart, is that we have our power, and we can choose to avoid facing our fears and to just have apathy, or we can choose to face them and look at them and go, okay, how can I be more in harmony with who I am, who I really am.
And we're going to have a presentation all about the importance of co-creation in 2020. So that's perfect. Yay.
Yes, beautiful.
With Lisa Michaels.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Lisa Michaels, nice. Everything about our civilization will have reached a crossroads point. Again, a major fork in the road for us, with more than two paths. I think there'll be many paths for us to choose from, and we're seeing sort of the precursors to that in the last couple of years, especially with the craziness of the new election, the U.S. government, and the U.S.'s impact upon the world, and also what's been happening in other countries and their challenges. I mean, civil wars and separation and nationalism and rights of people, human rights. That's going through a major revolution right now, and thankfully, and of course, in recent times, the feminine principle, the feminine itself, finding their voice and their personal power and being able to speak out. I think this is part of the wave that needs to continue and build up and happen. It's long overdue in my view. So what can we do? Well, we can show up for our lives. We can literally, instead of sleeping it off or just crawling in a ball and forgetting about it, it's actually, when we're called to action, when we're called to do something, is to show up, is to be there and do the best that we can in that sense. And whether it be something that is hitting us in a fearful way with anxiety, or whether we're feeling like we're limited or chained down, from a shadow perspective of Saturn. And we get to choose. We get to work through that and find out where that's coming from. Realize the crossroads are not to bind but to free through choice. So Saturn may be looked at as something that chains us down or binds us, or prevents us from doing it, blocks us with a wall, but in reality it guides us, and it may be guiding us in a more direct path, but it can free us from the chains of our past, of who we thought we once were, especially in regards to the structures we may have adopted from that are not healthy anymore. This is, again, breaking through those structures. Surrender to our soul's growth through facing our deepest fears, something we've talked about. Having faith in your own decisions, deciding what you truly want, deciding for what you truly want can be the hardest of all to do. And I know I've gone through that process before, and I know, Cayelin, you have as well. And many others in our circles in the community have done so, and it can be really liberating when we get when we get past that point. And it's not just getting past it, but it's actually taking action and going through it. Let go of any personal systems or structures, I mentioned that no longer serve you, and don't fight your path. So I've been guilty of this. I'm sure Cayelin has sometimes.
Never me.
Yeah, we're perfect, of course.
Yes, of course.
Shamanic astrologers were immune to this, right? Not the case.
Not so. No.
Yeah, fighting our path is the worst thing that you can do. What it ends up doing is you end up fighting yourselves, and you end up doing yourself a huge disservice. There are definitely some people in the government that are doing that in a big way. Be absolutely honest. Put it all on the table. I share that on many occasions with my clients, and especially if they're in a Saturn cycle, is, you know, you got to be really upfront and honest with yourself, even if you don't show it to anybody else, about what you are honest about. You show it, you got to find it within yourself to find that own personal truth. Okay, I think I'm going to go into the special offer here. How are we doing on time?
We're way past our time.
Good.
So, yeah.
We're done there. Oh, by the way, for people that are wondering what that picture is behind the words, that's a squirrel. And I took a picture because I thought it was so cool, and the squirrel is showing up for its life right now.
Yeah.
And it's doing what it needs to do. So.
And paying attention.
Absolutely, paying attention. So, one-time offer here, limited to the first 12 people. People get $30 off for a full reading, first-time reading with me. If you've gotten a reading with me before, it's only right now my price is only $100, but early next year I am going to raise my rates a little bit, and so that's just something to take advantage of. And I use these numbers 30 and 12 to honor the Jupiter and Saturn planets. And it's something I'm going to write also on my profile on the online summit. Here, you know, here's just a link to the online summit and what this is all about, preparing for 2020, and you know, seeding a new world.
Beautiful.
And that's how you can find me.
Plus, you can find them on the summit pages too.
Yes, and you can find me at the school all over the place. My email's all over. It's inspiralnexus@gmail.com or shamanicastrology@gmail.com. That's the school email address that I respond to. And my website, and of course the school's website. So, and I want to thank Daniel Giamario for creating this amazing paradigm that changed my life starting in 2004. And Cayelin, thank you for being here and helping with guiding me through this presentation.
My pleasure, Eric. Thank you so much. It's really amazing content that you've shared with everybody. So
awesome. Thanks. And let me, how do I, oh.